History. Well, there's all kinds of little aphorisms surrounding that word. Santayana said those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. The Balkans is often a region where it is said there's too much history and too little land. Things like this. And I'm inclined not to agree with these things, not to actually subscribe to these points of view, simply because we haven't really got a coherent idea as to what history actually is. For what it's worth, I wear a ring that says Carleton University, 1987, History. I got a degree in history with distinction. Now, what does that prove? Nothing. It proves that a bunch of people who also wear a ring like this or have a piece of paper that resembles mine have, based on very superficial evidence, decided that I'm entitled to have the same bits of paper and the same ring. That's all that it really proves. It doesn't prove that I'm any smarter than anyone else or that I know anything that anyone else doesn't already know. But I'm a sometime dilettante of history. I've got all kinds of books. I've read all kinds of books. Big deal. But one of the interesting things about history to me is that we can't really agree on what history actually is. Is history just a series of events that happened, we attach dates to, usually battles or political movements? Or is history a history of peoples? Or is history a history of gender, economics, education, whatever? There's history of just about anything out there. What I object to, or what the type of history I do not subscribe to, is what I referred to as the history of peoples. We, as in a people, have a particular history. I don't agree to that. I don't agree that such a thing actually exists. I don't think that there is logically something called Serbian history or Jewish history or female history or Christian history or whatever. Simply because I don't really believe that there's enough continuity within a race of people, within a people who identifies itself as a race, in order to make any sense out of it. For example, you look at Jewish versus Arab history. Two histories that are seemingly colliding right now. Well, okay, take a 20th century Jewish person, say an Israeli, teleport him back 200 years and introduce him to a 18th century Jewish person also living in Palestine, or Israel, whatever you want to call it. He wouldn't have anything in common with that Jewish person, who is supposedly one of him. Introduce him to an Arab Muslim of the 20th century, he would have far more in common with that contemporary Arab, the 21st century variant, than he would with an 18th century Jew. So, to which group does he belong? To which group does this Jew, the 20th century Israeli, belong? Well, he's inclined to think, well, I'm Jewish, and the 18th century Jewish person is part of me, my group, regardless of the fact that I wouldn't even recognize this person if I sat down and tried to have a conversation with him. Whereas the Arab is them, those other bad people, or not even maybe bad people, but perhaps my antagonist, even if in a friendly way, where our histories are colliding. You are they, even though I don't really have that much that differentiates me from you. So this notion of continuity is, to my mind, ridiculous. There is really no continuity. In fact, if you actually look at history in a certain light, that which unites us, even in the modern world, is far more obvious than that which divides us historically. And yet still we like to think of ourselves as sectioned off into groups of identifiable people throughout history. I'm always pointing out that I come from the Irish Catholic community, and the Irish are really big on dredging up history from the past, things from the past, to say what we did against they, what they did to us. You know the drill. We're not the only ones. The Irish Catholics are not the only ones to do this. Everybody does it to one extent or another. It gets really weird sometimes. The modern Republic of Macedonia and Greece today are in a huge and acrimonious fight, which can have real-world consequences on the ethnicity of Alexander the Great. Now, this is 2.5 millennia ago, and it may as well have happened yesterday for the emotions that are raised by it. In India, I was once on vacation in India in 1989, where there was another flare-up of the perennial outbursts of violence between the Hindus and the Muslims. Martial law was declared, although tourists were not subject to martial law for some reason or other. I could wander around. I went into a Muslim neighborhood where there was this seething sort of, all right, well, you might get us, but we're taking a few with us kind of atmosphere. I spoke to a few Muslims, and again, history gets dredged up. All the crimes that the Hindus have done to us over the centuries. Well, okay, then I leave the Muslim neighborhood. I go down by the Ganges River, where all the pilgrims gather, and I start talking to a few Hindus, and they've got their version as to what the Muslims historically have done to them, the Hindus. This kind of thing repeats itself all over the world. And I wonder why this is. Is this some sort of need that we have to identify ourselves as Group A? It's like that cartoon in Bugs Bunny. I grew up on Bugs Bunny, where Yosemite Sam and Bugs Bunny are shooting at each other from rival castles. They charge and pass each other, and each one has a flag. One says they, the other says we. As soon as they capture each other's castle, the flags go down, and it's now they and we, but opposite ends. Is this necessary? Is this part of what makes us human beings? We have to have a scapegoat out there. We have to have an other out there. And this creeps into our thinking about history. History of the Middle East, as I've alluded to earlier, is often a ferocious debate about what has taken place over a long period of time and whose fault it all is. Or who bears more blame than the other, which side is more to blame than the other for the mess that's there. To me, that misses the entire point. The question shouldn't be whose fault it all is. The question should be, how do we stop this? Now that's easier said than done, of course, because people just, again, it seems to be this natural instinct, this natural need to identify oneself with us and to identify others with them. The other, the scapegoat, the foil, the antagonist, the alien, and to project that back into the past and say, look, history sort of inevitably says that we are in the right and they are in the wrong. Isn't that convenient, how nobody ever says that they are historically in the wrong? So I think that history is being abused, or at least misemployed here, for people who are attempting to make a case for their actions in the present. Well, to me, again, that misses the entire point, because when you see things like Northern Ireland, Bosnia, the Balkans in general, the Middle East, anywhere there's a flashpoint in the world, the thinking shouldn't be, in my opinion, whose fault is this? Or who started it, or who's got more blame to shoulder. But how do we stop this conflict? The enemy isn't the other, in my opinion. The enemy is the conflict itself. Thank you.